If you're anything like me, you've probably first learned about Greek mythology through Disney's Hercules, one of the most iconic Disney movies of the 90s, as a story explaining that a true hero is not measured by their physical strength, but by the strength of their heart. It's one that weirdly enough isn't fully played out in our adventure through Olympus Coliseum, unlike many of the other worlds here in Kingdom Hearts. Of course, in subsequent entries, we will get to explore more of the world, but in the first entry into the series, this world has been relegated to an arena world that's surprisingly optional when playing through Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, if you weren't aware, the storylines and rewards within Olympus Coliseum are entirely optional. That said, Olympus Coliseum is still one of the most beloved worlds in the franchise, as it's made an appearance in nearly every Kingdom Hearts game. And I think I may know the reason behind this. So, just like how we explored our wondrous adventure through Wonderland, let's do the same here. Exploring Sora's adventure, then explaining the Disney story behind it, and ending with our mythical influences. So without further ado, let's explore the mythology behind Olympus Coliseum. Just like with Wonderland, as we come across Olympus Coliseum through the gummy ship path, the world shows us exactly what we're going to be experiencing: a Colosseum. Yeah, there's honestly not much to this world, and even when we first land, we get our initial title sequence and a panning shot of the front entrance. Though there's very little to actually explore, Olympus Coliseum still packs a lot into its small world throughout our time here. Between the hidden chests in the first area to the design work in all three sections of the world, and even in its many battles here. But heading through the Colosseum doors, we enter into the lobby and meet a funny-looking character writing or perhaps cleaning the rules on the wall? I'm not entirely sure. But this character is Philoctetes, a satyr and mentor to the great Hercules. Speaking with him, Phil asks us to move the solid stone pedestal, which shouldn't be too much of a problem. Man, if I only had two other friends who could help me move this, Reporting back to Phil, Sora exclaims that the stone is way too heavy, to which Phil realizes that he was talking to somebody else and not Hercules.
Honey, you mean Hercules!
But Phil explains that the Colosseum is about to open, and everyone is going to be wanting their turn at becoming the champ. It does make me laugh that as he talks to us, he has just as much trouble as we did trying to move the stone pedestal. Thankfully, however, he does give us a chance to show him what we're made of through his time trial. It's a simple enough task where we just need to break all the boxes within the time limit. So easy, in fact, that you can easily knock other boxes into one another to make the time go quicker. After completing this task, we're forced to do it again, but with a more complex setup this time around. Again, this next time trial isn't hard, and can even be completed without having to swing your Keyblade. But where's the fun in that? Now, with the tasks finished, we report back to Phil, who still isn't convinced that we're hero material yet. But he does give us a new spell, Thunder, which is one of the best spells throughout the entire game, as it can quickly and easily clear out hordes of Heartless. Leaving the lobby, a familiar voice calls out to our attention. That's way too enticing not to listen to.
Rather a stubborn old goat, wouldn't you say?
Who are you?
Oh, hey, hold on there, Fuzzboy. Wait, let me guess. You want to enter the games, right? Well then, hey, get a load of this.
A pass?
It's all yours. Good luck, kid. I'm pulling for you, little shorty.
Hades, Lord of the Dead, gifts us a genuine pass to enter into the games. An almost too easily acquired item, and given his character, we're not sure at this time what exactly he's plotting, but there's gotta be some catch, right? Thankfully, this narrative thread will be pulled throughout our time here, not only in our initial visit, but the next couple visits later down the line. When we show this pass to Phil, he's genuinely shocked that we have one so quickly, but doesn't press us on how we obtained it. But with the pass, we can officially begin our career in Olympic fighting, with the preliminaries. These fights are pretty standard, and about what we've faced in previous worlds. We'll need to fight through 7 total rounds of continuous battles without any time to recover. These battles are what really set the stage for what this world has to offer, as not only is there this preliminary, but also the Phil Cup, Pegasus Cup, Hercules Cup, and finally the Hades Cup, each of which are a part of the main story of the world, with each granting us a buku of experience and some very useful items. But we'll get to those tournaments in due time. After the first round of the prelims, we finally get to meet Cloud Strife, looking way cooler and more brooding than how we looked during his time in Final Fantasy VII. Seeing the man himself, we know that we're gonna have to face him eventually, and it won't be easy. After a few more rounds, we learn that he's in league with Hades, who wants us taken down. This is where we learn more about Hades' plan, and even if Cloud fails, there's still a backup deep in the shadows. Now at the 7th and final round, we get to face off against Cloud, who is no pushover. His fight is a matter of learning his mechanics and adapting to them. He hits hard and is very quick, so be sure to take your time. Thankfully, this is a fight that we're allowed to lose, but we know what we're doing, and we can beat Cloud without much issue. Once we beat Cloud, he'll come to congratulate us. In all honesty, this is one of the best introductions to a boss, and Cerberus is truly a beast to be reckoned with. And before he can devour us, Deus Ex Hercules shows up to hold the beast back. After running back to the lobby and stocking up on some potions, it's time to face the real boss of Olympus Coliseum, the 3-headed hound of the underworld. This fight, just like the one against Cloud, is not the easiest at our current level, as a lot of his attacks are physical, fire, and dark based, which we barely have any defenses for. When fighting him, it's best to choose a head on the sides and combo him after he bites. When he does his fireball attack, you can knock it back at him, but the timing for this is pretty precise. And finally, his dark pooling attack will follow your movement, so it forces you to dodge roll and jump like crazy just to avoid it. Defeating Cerberus doesn't actually kill him, surprisingly enough, but just knocks him out through sheer exhaustion. And now, as Cerberus is dealt with, Phil grants us the title of Junior Heroes and allows us to have full access to the future tournaments. But I mean, Junior Heroes? I'm with Donald on this one. We just took out a literal monster of Greek myth, and that's all we get? Also, I feel that Phil and Herc are just making it up on the spot, as even when we ask what it'll take to be a true hero, we get this.
Well, that's just something you'll have to find out for yourselves. Just the way that I did.
And even then, Herc says that Cerberus was worn down by the time we entered the fight. Heck, I might side with Hades with scams like these. As we leave the world, we catch up to Cloud, who continues to be dark and brooding. Just like how I remember him. He mentions that he fell into darkness and is trying to find his light, to which Sora mentions that he is as well, establishing common ground between them both. This interaction even grants us Cloud's signature move, Sonic Blade, which is a good move, but should only be used in large groups of enemies. As time passes as we exit, Hades begins to speak to himself about taking down Hercules and us as well. Of course, it wouldn't be a villain scene without the mistress of all evil stepping in to steal the show, setting up the thought that even the darkest of hearts can still lose control of the darkness. And with that, this world is officially complete. And what's it? There's more. 4 more visits. Right. Well, since we didn't actually lock the keyhole or fight Hades, let's briefly go over the next few visits. With the first cup of the game, the Phil Cup, it'll become available after sealing the keyhole in Traverse Town, and it consists of 9 rounds of Heartless fights. The trouble with these fights come in the form of the guard armor pieces. Though you don't actually get to face the guard armor in its full form, you'll still have to face its feet with Power Wilds, its torso with Blue Rhapsody and Yellow Operas, and so on and so forth. All of which make the fights a bit more annoying than challenging, especially the Power Wilds and feet. Winning this cup will grant us the Gravity Spell, however. The next tournament is the Pegasus Cup, and it's available after completing Monstro's World. This cup is set up in the same format as the previous cup, but has more powerful Heartless and a larger variety of enemies. The final fight in particular sees you fighting against our two friends from Traverse Town, Leon and Yuffie. Now, this fight is actually a bit of a challenge, as Yuffie will constantly barrage you with shuriken as Leon charges you with his strong physical slashes. It's best to focus down Yuffie, as she is the weakest between the two, and knocking back her shuriken will actually stun her for a brief time. And with Leon left by himself, you can easily focus him down and even knock him back after a successful combo. But winning this actually grants you Strike Raid, which, between that and Cloud's Sonic Blade, is the much better choice, as its single target damage is much greater and even grants you a larger window of immunity. The next tournament, and penultimate cup, is the Hercules Cup, being available after completing both Halloween Town and Neverland. This cup is actually one of the easier tournaments to get through, as by this point in the game, you should be pretty well leveled, have a wide assortment of abilities and gear to help you fight, and you should have a better feel of the fights overall. The real challenge comes from the rematch against Cloud, who is much stronger than before and much more aggressive than his previous fight. This is especially true when he takes on his one-winged angel form, which makes him completely invulnerable as he flies around and slashes at you at high speeds. The final fight of the cup is against none other than Hercules himself, to which Sora boasts that he wants to actually take him on 1v1.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
This fight is so easy, to the point that it's ridiculous. All you have to do is just stun him with a barrel, beat on him, and win. And with this victory, we actually get Herc's shield for Goofy, and we finally learn about how to be true heroes. That through friendship and togetherness, your strength is unmatched. And to cement this, we get the hardest bro clap ever. Moreover, we finally get to unlock the chest that's been sitting in the lobby, getting us one of the strongest Keyblades in the game, Olympia. And as well, we even get to learn the new ability for the Yellow Trinity. With it, we can finally move the stone pedestal from before, and reveal the hidden keyhole to the world. And with that, the world is finally complete, and we... What was it? We're still not done? But we sealed the keyhole and... Oh, right, we never fought Hades. Okay, even after all that, the Hades Cup is our final and ultimate challenge for this world. And it's only made available right before the final world of the game. And this cup throws everything it has at you in 49 consecutive rounds. This means every Heartless, boss fight, and combination of enemies you've seen are now in your way and becoming the undisputed champ of the world. You'll be facing off against Yuffie, Behemoth, Cerberus, Leon and Cloud together, Hades, and so many more. But even with all this, Hades himself isn't even the final fight of the tournament. It's Rock Titan. You know how I said that Hercules was one of the easiest fights to the point that it's ridiculous? Yeah, this is even more so. And then some. The Rock Titan does absolutely nothing, and just has a lot of health. So wail on him until he becomes nothing more than rubble. And now, with that, Olympus Coliseum is officially complete. Ignore those. So, if you're any familiar with the story of Hercules and Disney's Hercules, you could probably tell that the journey that we take through Olympus Coliseum is vastly different from the animated movie. no training montage where he gets absolutely beefy, no love interest with Meg, and especially no pain or panic. Okay, maybe a little pain. But, by the by, the world of Olympus Coliseum takes a notable turn from the rest of the worlds in Kingdom Hearts, and I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I'm actually a fan of it, as it actually opens up the door for us to explore more of the Greek myths that form this world and Hercules' story as presented by Disney Animation. Fair warning, none of the footage I'm about to show and talk about I own, but I'm legally putting it out there that this next portion is to show Disney's version of the Hercules story. Please don't sue me, Disney. Oh, and yes, I am aware that I keep saying Hercules when his name is actually supposed to be Heracles, but I'm getting to that. Hold your horses. Anyway, Hercules' story begins as a newborn on Mount Olympus to Zeus and Hera. However, James Woods, Hades, isn't happy about this, as he wants to rule all of Olympus and the rest of the universe. In meeting with the three sisters of fate, Hades learns that if Hercules is to make it to the age of 18, Hades' plan to rule all will be thwarted. After stealing baby Hercules and making him drink mortality juice, Hercules loses his godhood, but thankfully doesn't drink every last drop, and he's still able to retain his godlike strength. Being picked up by Amphitryon and Alcmene, Hercules is raised to be a seemingly normal teenager, though with highly unusual strength. Years later, and sometime before his 18th birthday, Hercules is marred as an outcast due to his clumsiness and superhuman strength. Now, to help him find himself, Amphitryon and Alcmene share with him that he was adopted by them and was found wearing the seal of Zeus. And with this knowledge, Hercules steps on his way to the Temple of Zeus to discover his true identity. It shocks him to learn that he is, in fact, the son of Zeus, and that he was taken away as a baby and cannot return home unless he becomes a god once again and a true hero. Meeting Pegasus once again, they make their way to Philoctetes to train in one of the most enjoyable training montages in film history. Also, I'm sorry I can't play the music here, as it's heavily copyrighted. Becoming truly Hercules,
Honey, you mean Hercules.
he flies with Phil to find the damsel in distress, Meg, as she is being grabbed by the river centaur Nessus. Able to beat him easily, Hercules falls head over heels for Meg. But after this, Hercules, Phil, and Pegasus make their way to Thebes to find more hero work. Surprisingly, they instead find Meg again, who tells them that some kids are trapped in the gorge nearby. Upon freeing them, Hercules unknowingly unleashes the terrifying monster, the Lernaean Hydra. Unsurprisingly, Hercules is terrified to fight the beast, realizing that slicing its head off will just make more grow in its place. Eventually, after the fierce battle, the Hydra is defeated by an avalanche of boulders being dropped on the beast and crushing it to death. Thankfully, Hercules makes it out alive and becomes a hero to the people. He becomes an action figure, an accessorizer, and even a Walk of Fame star, where he gets to live the high life defeating monsters. But sadly, he is not a true hero yet, and cannot return to Olympus. In the spur of the moment, Meg and Hercules decide to go out and have a romantic night together, only for them both to be torn away from each other by an angry Pegasus and Phil. With Phil getting left behind by accident, he learns that Meg is secretly in cahoots with Hades in securing his victory over Hercules. However, when Phil tries to explain this to Hercules, his godly strength and anger comes out, and he nearly kills Phil with just a smack. Hades uses this time to trick Hercules into giving up his godly strength for 24 hours, and he does so in order to save Meg, promising that if Meg gets hurt during the day, Hercules' strength will return in full. And in making this pact, Hades saps Hercules of his strength and uses the stars' alignment to free the Titans from their prison. sicking them on the unsuspecting Olympus. However, one Titan, the Cyclops, makes his way to Thebes to sack the city. During this rumble, Meg saves Hercules, but is unfortunately crushed and mortally wounded. This gives Hercules his strength back, and he returns to Olympus to destroy the Titans for good. Saving his parents and siblings, Hercules rushes back to Meg, knowing that her time is running short. But sadly, he isn't fast enough to reach her, and Meg's thread is cut, just as Hercules makes it back to her. I'm not crying. You're crying. Shut up. Of course, what would any love-induced god do in this situation? Why, they'd storm the gates of Hades atop the back of Cerberus and demand their love's soul back. That's what. But Hercules soon realizes that Meg swims within the river Styx and cannot be taken out with enough time to save himself. Making one final pact with Hades to free Meg and take him instead, Hercules dives in to save Meg. And just as he's about to reach her, his thread is prepared, and the scissors clamp on the string. To the fate's dismay, Hercules' thread won't cut, and is now glowing. Finding that in his voluntary sacrifice, Hercules had proven himself to be a true hero, and while saving Meg from an eternity of death, he regains his godly strength. With Meg and Hercules reunited, Hercules is given the opportunity to join the other Olympians, his family. But Hercules decides to stay on Earth with Meg, as this is where he truly belongs. And they all lived happily ever after. I think it's fair to say that Disney's interpretation of the story of Hercules is a really touching story. It's of finding one's own identity, and that our selfless actions for others are what make true heroes. That said, this story is vastly different from the original Greek myth, but that doesn't make it a bad story. I mean, it helped me get into Greek mythology, and I'm certain it helped others as well. And speaking of Greek mythology, in all honesty, I feel like a kid in a candy store with their dad's credit card when it comes to what's here in this world. It's pretty obvious that this world takes a lot of inspiration from Disney's Hercules. But as we look further, we can actually see inspiration from the ancient art, architecture, and stories that surround and even form Greek mythology. So I'll try not to go off on too many tangents in this, as we're already pretty well into this video. But I think it's pretty fair to start with the name of this world, Olympus Coliseum. It's a title that's pretty self-explanatory, a Colosseum within Olympus. Or is it for Olympus? On it? Either preposition you want to use, it's a pretty simple and slightly deceptive title, even when considering the fact that ancient Greece didn't actually have colosseums like how the Roman Empire did. Instead, Greece primarily held large festivals in the form of sporting events known as the Panhellenic Games. These games, the Olympic, Pythian, Nemean, and Isthmian, were held in specific cities that were the most sacred to the region's governing gods. And within these cities, like Olympia and Delphi, large amphitheaters or rectangular stadiums were used to hold athletic events like wrestling, boxing, and even the Stadion, or the 100-meter dash, which is where we actually get the name for stadium. To the Greeks, the Panhellenic Games, the Olympic, Pythian, Nemean, and Isthmian, were also some of the most popular and prominent religious festivals in Greece. Believed to have begun during the late 7th century BCE, these festivals not only saw athletic competitions to crown the strongest Greek, but as I had mentioned earlier, were also used as celebrations for the gods that represented each city or region, with Zeus being the patron deity over the Olympic and Nemean Games, Apollo being honored during the Pythian Games, and Poseidon presiding over the Isthmian Games. As for when these events took place, Each game would be held just after the summer solstice every 4 years, with a year being in between each game. So, for example, if the Olympic Games were being held in 800 BCE, the Nemean Games would begin the very next year in 799, then the Pythian Games after that, and then finally the Isthmian before cycling back into the Olympic Games. If a person were to win an event during any of these games, their reward would not only be the fame and lavish compensation for their victory, but as well the sacred crowns or wreaths for each region. Something I find incredibly interesting with all this is the fact that all of these games were believed to have begun by none other than the god of strength himself, Hercules. Oh, and yes, we can finally mention the fact that Hercules is not actually the Greek name, but instead the Roman equivalent. I'll go over the story of Hercules in just a bit, but according to the Greek poet Pindar, he states in his Olympian Odes that Hercules had begun the Olympic Games after a fierce battle, creating the festival to honor his father Zeus with athletic competitions, music, and plenty of sacrifices. I think it's worth mentioning at this point as well that this world of Olympus Coliseum really cements the idea of combining the Greek and Roman beliefs and long-held traditions on top of the naming convention for Hercules within a Greek setting, as within Rome, the Colosseum or the Flavian Amphitheater was the center for entertainment within the city, providing citizens a view of epic gladiatorial fights against exotic animals, sea battle reenactments, and incredible set pieces for the arena. Now, what I mean by this combining of the two is that we see Hercules, the Roman god, fight within a Roman Colosseum, with his Greek mentor, Philoctetes, at his side, all in an effort to honor his father, Zeus, on Olympus in a Greek-structured tournament. A true amalgamation of two analogous cultures. In Sora's adventure, when we first enter into the world, our surroundings fill us with the sense that we're atop Olympus. We can look out the side of the world and see nothing but the sky and the sand pouring off the side of the world. And this is actually a really excellent way to portray what a Colosseum might be like if it were here on Olympus. As it was said to be the home of the Olympians, ancient Greeks believed that the mountain itself, Olympus, of northern Greece, was truly the home of the gods. Not just on the summit of the mountain, but high above it in the heavens. This sacred and holy place held palaces for the major and even minor Olympians, but with Zeus in particular being revered as its owner. This becomes more apparent within Hesiod's hymn to the Muses, where he states, "The goddesses sing of Zeus, the father of gods and men, as they begin and end their strain, how much he is the most excellent among the gods and in supreme power." 9 goddesses of music and the arts who chant with their soothing and silken voices to please the highest of all gods, Zeus. 9 muses who take an especially prominent role within Disney's story of Hercules as the narrators of the story or as a chorus of this Greek play. So just as the Olympics were stages for athletic superiority, they were also meant to honor the chief god Zeus. And though a Colosseum is primarily a Roman title, this is still a stadium to honor the gods, especially that of Zeus, whose lightning bolt is seen prominently on the doors to the Colosseum and accents throughout the world. Something else I'd like to show is this relief atop the doorways of the exit of the world and on the side exits in the stadium, depicting a gladiator figure and 2 winged beasts flanking him. These beasts appear as griffins, who were the chimeric kings of both the land and the sky of Greco-Roman belief, as they had the head, wings, and claws of an eagle, as well as the body of a lion. However, I don't think that this is the case here, as upon further inspection, these depictions show a head with prominent and pointed ears, as well as strong and wide forelimbs, features that are indicative of this instead being a sphinx, which, considering where Hercules' home is and the history behind it, this makes it all the more fitting. In Disney's Hercules, he and Phil make their way to Thebes to search for hero work, and after attaining fame and fortune, make their home in the city. This is relatively true of the Greek Hercules, as he was born and raised in the city of Thebes, later making it his home there with his family. What's special about Thebes in relation to the griffin is the fact that the tragic Greek story of Oedipus Rex features the Sphinx as the guardian of Thebes. If you're not aware of the story, Oedipus Rex sees Oedipus being prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother. When he arrived at the city gates, a Sphinx blocked the road, asking any who passed by a riddle. If they were able to answer it correctly, they could pass on into the city. However, if they couldn't, the Sphinx would devour them in an instant. In the story, Oedipus is able to solve the riddle and pass on to the city, continuing on to his prophesized journey. And in all honesty, to have the Sphinx stand above the entrances into the world and the side exits of the stadium into Olympus Coliseum, I find it extremely fitting, as these creatures of both Greek and Egyptian myth were believed to be the guardians of the different regions or kingdoms that they lived in. As well, something that connects them further to this story is the fact that Hera, the queen of the gods, was the one to place the Sphinx at the entrance into Thebes, in opposition to an ancient blasphemy. And in Heracles' story, it's Hera who gives the god of strength his ferocious madness, connecting her and the Sphinx to this world and Thebes. So, we've talked about the world overall and some of the set pieces that make up this world, but I think it's time that we talked about the many characters that exist within this world, with our first being Phil, the small satyr that we meet in the lobby when we first enter the world. In Disney's interpretation, Phil, or Philoctetes, is depicted as a satyr, a half-goat, half-man that pines for a good-looking woman, while also being the personal trainer for many heroes of Greek myth.
I trained all those would-be heroes. Odysseus, Perseus, Theseus, a lot of yusses.
Now, satyrs in Greek myth are notorious horn dogs and purveyors of good wine and good music. I would show their art here, but let's just say that they would be very big fans of OnlyFans. As for Greek myth surrounding Philoctetes, he's actually just a normal man who is exceedingly good at archery. This change from a normal man to a satyr might come from the idea behind satyr plays in Greece, theatrical productions that infused both comedy and tragedy into their plays, while introducing satyrs as a sort of comic relief type character. This is furthered as Disney is notorious for doing this exact type of writing for many of their movies, especially Hercules. Now, for Philoctetes within Greek mythology, he is not very prominent within the story of Heracles, sadly. For the most part, Philoctetes is in possession of Heracles' bow, and helps in the many battles against Troy during that time. As well, he is sometimes depicted as the one who immolates Heracles after the demigod is poisoned. Immolates? I'm gonna say immolates. Though in some cases, it is his father Poeas, who is the one to help Heracles shed his mortal body. So, if Phil, or Philoctetes, wasn't the one who really trained Heracles, then who was? Why, it was none other than Pierce Brosnan. That's who. Okay, well, that's not entirely true. In reality, it is his character in the Percy Jackson films, Chiron, the centaur, a half-man, half-horse that trains Heracles to become the amazing fighter that he is. So skilled is Chiron as a trainer that it was said that he even trained the other heroes, such as Achilles and even Jason. In myth, Chiron is the wisest and most knowledgeable of teachers, while being wholly opposite to the other centaurs, as their race were primarily seen as vicious savages who didn't know their hind from their fore. Sadly, the story of both Heracles and Chiron ends tragically, as Heracles accidentally shoots Chiron's knee with a poisoned arrow, and as Chiron wanted to end his pain, he gave his life and immortality to the punished Prometheus, freeing both the Titan and himself from torment. Following the story of Olympus Coliseum, the next character we come across after meeting Phil is none other than my favorite Disney villain and Greek god, Hades, Lord of the Underworld. And I'd just like to say that James Wood's depiction of the villain is a masterclass of character creation and execution. But we're not here to gush. In looking at Hades and his depiction as a villain to Hercules' story, it's rather odd to me that he is the villain of the story, as within Greek mythology, Hades, being the lord of the underworld, is a rather neutral figure, as he is oftentimes too preoccupied with running the realms of the dead to go on escapades like his younger brother Zeus. The only time Hades is ever directly involved in Greek myth is within the Persephone myth. I've explained this story in our previous journey through Wonderland, which, if you haven't seen that yet, I'd highly recommend it. But as I was saying, this story is the only time that Hades is actually considered a villain in a story, through kidnapping the goddess of vegetation and springtime. However, on the scale of Greek gods, a kidnapping is by far the tamest action, especially when compared to his brothers, Poseidon and even Zeus, the king of the gods. And a king, might I add, who has gone behind Hera's back, his wife, multiple times, and even had multiple children from these acts, one of which being the hero of Olympus Coliseum, Hercules. For Hades, the reasoning behind this villainous portrayal more than likely stems from the view of hell that is believed to have begun sometime during the 17th century BCE, with the conjunction of the Semite and Egyptian cultures. As the Semite people learned of the religious views of the Egyptian people and their views on the afterlife, they would learn that the souls of the dead for Egyptians didn't ascend blissfully as they had viewed it, but instead learned that the souls ventured under the earth for judgment. This sentiment of souls being sent to an underworld did relate to their view of Sheol, or a realm of death and extreme stillness. Now, in relative terms, this and the Greek realm of the dead, Hades, were fairly similar, as both held the righteous and unrighteous. However, what differed for the Semites was the evolution of the thought behind it. As Jewish views changed over millennia and Christianity emerged, the thought of the Sheol and Hades as realms of the dead became a realm of punishment and demons, otherwise known as hell to many. This view on the underworld, or the realm of Hades, being one of torment, would be furthered in another 1,000 years, and even be featured in the poem The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri in 1321 CE, with one passage reading, "Lo, he exclaimed, lo, dis, and lo, to the place, where thou hast need no arm thy heart with strength." This quote being the moment where Dante and his guide Virgil come upon the devil frozen at the bottom of hell, with the usage of the name Dis, or really Dis Pater, cementing the thought, as he, Dis Pater, was the ruler of the underworld for Roman mythology, or was otherwise known as Pluto, the Roman equivalent to Hades. So, coming back to it, the view of Hades being the villain in Disney's Hercules, and subsequently here on Olympus Coliseum, stems from the thought of Hades being equated to the devil, while Zeus and Olympus would be equated to the Abrahamic god in heaven. One last thing I'd like to add is the fact that Heracles and Hades, for that matter, in Greek mythology, do actually interact with one another during Heracles' 12th labor, which is actually a fantastic segue into our next character that we come across, Cerberus, the three-headed hound of the underworld. Known as Kerberos to the Greeks, the three-headed dog is the goodest boy under Hades' command. Functioning primarily as the guardian of the underworld, he prevents anyone from exiting the underworld unwarranted. Within Olympus Coliseum, the Cerberus that we fight against shares the same ferocity as his Greek counterpart, as well as his overall design: 3 heads, razor-sharp teeth, and a very muscular frame. However, his interpretations within myth have varied between the different writers during the time. According to Homer, in his Iliad, he refers to Kerberos as the triple dog, creating the image of 3 dogs conjoined into one. In Hesiod's Theogony, he officially references the Hound of Hades as Kerberos for the first time and has attributed them as having 50 heads. Moreover, Kerberos in Greek mythology was a monster that was said to have been the son of the king and queen of the monsters, Typhon and Echidna. Now, finally, with the playwright Euripides, he wrote in his tragedy Hercules that Kerberos had both 3 heads and 3 bodies within one, crafting him similarly to the giant Geron, adding that they were both conquered by Heracles. Speaking of Heracles, as the hero of Olympus Coliseum, he appears surprisingly very little in the world, only popping up the end of our first visit, and at the end of the Heracles Cup, providing the greatest dap of all time. Thinking about it, he appears just as much as Hades, so really, both of them are the main character for this world. That said, Hercules may be the hero here in Kingdom Hearts and in his Disney story, but in myth, his story is vastly different and more akin to God of War's Kratos than anything. And before we get into his stories, I just want to briefly mention that Hercules' noble steed, Pegasus, is sadly missing from this world, only getting a cup named after him. And if you know anything about Pegasus, you'll know that this winged horse is not actually associated with Heracles, but instead with his great-grandfather, Perseus, another child of Zeus who had beheaded Medusa, and through her bloodied neck, subsequently birthed the immortal Pegasus. And with that out of the way, let's finally discuss Heracles and his story. As you've probably realized by now, I've been throwing small tidbits of the story of Heracles, from his parentage to some of his interactions with characters like Hades and Philoctetes, but ultimately, the stories of Heracles' 12 labors are by far the most well-known and popular of his many adventures. The story begins with Heracles meeting the lovely Megara. They married under her father, King Creon. Together, they had 3 sons, Thermachus, Creontides, and Dicune, forming a lovely Greek family. However, Hera, queen of the gods and wife to Zeus, was still furious at Heracles' happiness and furious at her failed attempts to kill him as a child. During one fateful night, Hera bewitched the demigod and caused his mind to writhe with madness, convincing him to kill his wife and 3 sons. Waking from this madness, Heracles ran to the oracle at Delphi to find guidance. Here, he was told to serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae to fully atone for his sins. I should note as well that it's at this point that Heracles officially changes his birth name from Alcaeus to Heracles as an effort to appease Hera. But under the thumb of Eurystheus, Heracles was tasked with 10 impossible labors to complete in order to redeem himself and gain his godly immortality. The first, as written by the mythographer Apollodorus, was the slaying of the Nemean lion. a beast so powerful that its hide could not be damaged by even the sharpest blade. Venturing deep into the bush of Nemea, Heracles found the lion lurking in the mountains. When it had returned to its den, Heracles cornered the beast and knocked it out with his club. After strangling the beast to death, he used the lion's claws to skin it, giving Heracles an impenetrable cloak to protect him in his further labors. Upon returning with the pelt around him, the success and visage of Heracles terrified King Eurystheus so much that he forbade the demigod from entering the city, forcing Heracles to show his victories outside the city gates. The second task for Heracles was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, which proved to be a bit more difficult than his previous quest, as the beast lived within a poisonous swamp. Reaching the lair of the Hydra, Heracles could barely breathe. As he began to fight the Hydra, he would cut off the head and another would quickly grow in its place. Worried that he'd grow tired before being able to kill the monster, he called his nephew Iolaus for help. They thought quickly, and as Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus swiftly cauterized the beast's neck, preventing another head from growing out of it. Finally, Heracles was able to cut off the immortal head of the Hydra, and as it writhed and wriggled on the ground, he crushed it with a boulder. And with its defeat, Heracles dipped his arrows into the Hydra's blood as his trophy. His next task was to catch the impossibly swift and sacred deer of Artemis, the Cernaean hind, a stag with golden antlers that stood taller than even the largest bull. Deep in the forests of Cernea, Heracles began to run after the stag, but the deer took off like a bolt of light. The demigod persevered in his hunt of the hind for an entire year before chasing it all the way to Hyperborea's mountain Artemisius. There, the deer needed to take a moment to catch its breath and get a drink at the river of Ladon. However, in that brief moment of respite, Heracles captured the deer, being sure not to harm it so as to appease the patron deity Artemis. Taking it back to King Eurystheus, he agreed that Heracles had completed the task, and that they would sacrifice it to the gods and enjoy its meat. When Heracles released the deer, however, it took off once again and returned home. In his fourth task, Heracles was to capture the Erymanthian boar. This massive and dangerous wild hog roamed Mount Erymantheus, and in the dead of winter, Heracles began his hunt. There in the mountains, he found the boar digging and eating its fill, to which Heracles wildly ran at the boar, shouting at it to catch it off guard. And as both ran around and after one another, Heracles drove the boar deep into a pile of snow, trapping it and tying it up with chains. When he had brought the boar back to Eurystheus, the king was even more terrified than before and jumped into a large pithos to hide from Heracles for the rest of his labors. With his fifth labor, Heracles was to clean the Augean stables in a single day. This would be impossible for any normal person, as the cattle there were immortal and produced an immense amount of manure. Thankfully, as Heracles was nearly as clever as he was strong, he quickly realized that the Alpheus and Peneus rivers were nearby. For hours, he dug a trench from the stables to the two rivers, diverting them into the festering stables, clearing out the filth in an instant, and completing his fifth labor with ease. In his sixth labor, Heracles was to kill the Stymphalian birds, who were unlike any bird throughout Greece, as these monsters had beaks of bronze, metallic feathers, and above all else, poisonous poop. Plaguing the people of Arcadia, Heracles needed help to slay these birds, as no mortal could sway them from their nests, lest the birds were hungry. Being gifted rattles by Athena and Hephaestus, these instruments, known as crotalas, allowed Heracles to scare the birds from their nest. Finding a cliffside near their nests, Heracles began rattling the crotalas, forcing the birds to fly high into the sky. And using his poison-dipped arrows, Heracles struck down nearly every bird. leaving only a handful alive as they swiftly flew away. The seventh labor of Heracles called for him to subdue the Cretan bull, a fierce and snow-white bull that was brought to the Isle of Crete by Poseidon as a show of Minos' stake as king. This was the same bull that had sired the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull from King Minos' wife, Pasiphae. As Heracles arrived onto Crete, he ran straight to his target, and seeing the bull, he stormed the beast, wrangling the bull by its horns better than any cowboy. Heracles then held the bull down and tied up its limbs and head, immobilizing the bull completely. And just as quickly as Heracles had arrived, he had completed his task and left. This same bull will be later known as the Marathonian bull, as it had escaped Eurystheus' cage and had wrought havoc in Marathon. For his eighth labor, Heracles was tasked with stealing the mares of Diomedes. Much like the Stymphalian birds, the mares weren't normal horses of Thrace. Instead, these monsters were said to breathe fire from their nostrils and devour human flesh any chance that they could. Hearing of the voracious beasts of Diomedes, Heracles met with their handler, and upon realizing that he was next to be fed to the mares, Heracles held Diomedes hostage and fed him to his own horses, a feast that thankfully calmed the horses down just long enough for Heracles to bind each of their mouths shut, allowing him to freely take them back to Eurystheus. In his ninth labor, Heracles was to obtain a belt for Eurystheus' daughter, Admete, from Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. In one version of this labor, Heracles retrieves the belt without much issue, as the queen had heard of his strength and honored him with any gift he desired. Though, according to, again, Apollodorus, he states that Hera had spread a rumor that Heracles had sought to conquer the Amazons instead, and when attacking the demigod, they were instead no match for Heracles' strength and impenetrable cloak, allowing him to overpower the queen and strip her of her belt. In his 10th labor, Heracles was required to capture the cattle of the giant Geryon, a three-headed and three-bodied giant living in Erythea of the Hesperides, who was said to be the grandson of Medusa. It's said that on his travels to Erythea, Heracles grew so tired of the sun in the Libyan desert that he shot an arrow at it. Seeing this act, Helios, the personification of the sun, acknowledged Heracles' strength and helped him reach Erythea by use of his chariot. Upon landing, Heracles was quickly attacked by the two-headed watchdog, Orthrus, who was quickly dispatched by Heracles' club. Even the herdsman of Geryon's cattle faced the same fate as he tried to investigate what had happened to his dog. Geryon then sprung into action after hearing the fighting, and without even a chance to swing his sword, Heracles had struck Geryon in the middle head with his poisoned arrow, killing the giant instantly. And with Geryon out of the way, Heracles could herd the cattle back to Eurystheus and complete his 10th and final labor. However, Heracles would still be bound to the surface of Eurystheus, as neither the killing of the Hydra nor the cleaning of the Augean stables would be counted, as the Hydra was killed with the help of Iolaus, and the stables were cleaned by the rivers and not Heracles himself. And so Eurystheus tasked Heracles with 2 more labors to make up for this. With the first, Heracles was to steal 3 golden apples of the Hesperides, and the last was to capture the hound of Hades himself, Cerberus. With the 11th task, Heracles was unaware of where to actually locate the Garden of the Hesperides. He knew it would be close to Geryon's home, but it was divinely concealed from prying eyes. To find its location, it's believed that he caught the shapeshifter Nereus, the old man of the sea, by his beard, and forced the location of the garden out of him. Finally getting to the garden, Heracles found the Titan Atlas holding up the heavens. and as the Hesperides would more than likely turn Heracles away from getting the apples, he asked Atlas instead for help, as it's believed that he was their father. Atlas agreed, but only if Heracles took his place in holding the heavens. As he did, Atlas quickly acquired the apples and returned to the straining Heracles. However, Atlas desired to bring these apples to Eurystheus instead, and leave Heracles here to hold the heavens in his place. Being quick and clever, Heracles agreed to this, but insisted that he be allowed to adjust his cloak over his shoulders to help with his grip. As Atlas agreed and helped Heracles, the demigod quickly grabbed the apples from Atlas and left the Titan to hold the heavens, allowing Heracles to return to Eurystheus with the apples and complete this impossible task. For his 12th and final labor, Heracles was to enter the underworld and retrieve the three-headed hound, Cerberus. To prepare for this trial, Heracles first traveled to Eleusis of Athens, where he took part in the Eleusinian Mysteries, giving honor to the queen of the underworld Persephone and her mother Demeter to seek safe passage into the underworld. As Heracles ventured into the depths of the afterlife, both Athena and Hermes guided his steps to ensure his safekeeping, thanks to his past successes and acceptance through the mysteries. After traveling through the underworld for what seemed like days, Heracles came upon the throne of Hades and asked him for his hound for a brief moment. Hades surprisingly agreed to this without much issue, so long as Heracles could wrestle the good boy into submission. With his bare hands, Heracles was able to easily overpower the beast and carried the hound to the surface. Showing the ferocious beast to an already further frightened Eurystheus, the king quickly jumped back into his Pythos and officially declared Heracles' labors complete and Heracles free from Hera's wrath. So, we've talked about the major players in Disney's Hercules: Phil, Hades, Cerberus, and Hercules. But there's still two more things here that are featured in Olympus Coliseum that we haven't got to mention yet: the Titans. As the villains of the Disney story of Hercules, they served as nearly the same purpose within Greek mythology. But before you get up in arms in the comments, the Titans are extremely nuanced given their stories and standings in ancient Greek belief. Now, let's first talk about the two that are featured here in Olympus Coliseum: the Rock Titan being the final boss of the Hades Cup, and the Ice Titan, the contender of the Gold match. By the time you're supposed to face these enemies near the end of the game, the Titans are essentially pushovers, with the Rock Titan especially being so, since he just stands there, doing nothing much of anything.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Now, as Disney paints these Titans as representing the different elements in nature, earth, wind, fire, and water or ice in this case, many of the Titans didn't actually represent these in Greek myth. The only closest representations would be Oceanus of the ocean and Helios, the personification of the sun. Now, that isn't to say that the elements didn't exist, as they were very much present within Greek belief at the time. Earth was especially important, as the Titan Gaia was perceived as the whole world itself, acting as a mother to everything on it. In addition, fire was deeply important to Greek belief, as fire was seen as a gift to mankind from Prometheus, the Titan of foresight, who had stolen the primordial fire from Olympus, an act that would see him tormented for the rest of his life. This is all to say that the elements hold a very deep importance to the natural world that the ancient Greeks believed in. As for the Titans themselves, I had mentioned before that they were seen as the villains in Greek myth, though they still served a major role within the natural order of the world. These days, many view Kronos, or Cronus, Zeus's father, to be the big bad of the Greek pantheon, and in some cases, Yes, he is. I mean, he ate his children to prevent them from taking over his throne, condemning himself and his fellow Titans later on to imprisonment within Tartarus when Zeus grew up and freed his siblings, beginning the Titanomachy, an epic battle between the gods and Titans for supremacy of Olympus and of the world. That said, there were still many ancient Greeks who worshipped Kronos and celebrated his presence through the Chronia, a harvest festival known for freedom and feasting. And this is where the nuance of the Titans comes into play, as many of them serve nearly the same purpose as the Olympians, being representations of nature or of the unknown. Now, among the Titans were their siblings, the Giants or Gigantes, a race of great strength, size, and aggression. It's with this race that I believe the villainous nature of the Titans get confused with, as they are related to the Titans, sharing the same birth mother and father, as well as having their own war against the Olympians, called the Gigantomachy. Now, what sets them apart, however, is their aggression and ferocity, as, again, the mythographer Apollodorus states in his libraries, these were matchless in the bulk of their bodies, and invincible in their might. Terrible of aspect did they appear, and they darted rocks and burning oaks at the sky. It's these giants or gigantes that would be either killed in the Gigantomachy or be locked away forever under the mountains and volcanoes of the area, causing them to erupt and shake the earth, again connecting them to the earth and its natural elements. One last thing I'd like to mention are the names of the hidden matches that we get to fight in after completing the 4 cups in this world: the gold match and the platinum match. These two are fitting names for these matches, as not only is gold the highest prize for the modern-day Olympics, an event that was said to have been started by Hercules, but both it and the element platinum are found to be extremely precious metals that have been associated with Hades. As these metals could only be found deep within the earth, they would naturally be seen as the treasures of the underworld. Even within Roman belief, this would be continued through Pluto, in which in Latin means the rich one. And speaking of rich, if we choose to enter the platinum match, we get to fight against the hardest boss in Kingdom Hearts, Sephiroth, who, when defeated, grants you a new Keyblade and 10,000 experience. On top of this, we get to see one of the most epic fights ever. So I couldn't not let that play out. It's just way too epic not to include. But that said, Olympus Coliseum is an absolutely brilliant world that has a lot to it given its place in Kingdom Hearts. An optional world that is filled to the brim with Greek mythology, and a world that is wholly different from the rest of the worlds in this game. Story-wise, I'm honestly a huge fan of it, as Hades gets set up as the main villain and isn't completely destroyed within 10 minutes of us landing in the world. I'm also a huge fan of the origins of everything here, the history of the games, the use of iconic imagery associated with ancient Greece, and the many characters that help bring to life the stories of classical myth. So it's really no wonder why this world would continue to be featured in nearly every subsequent Kingdom Hearts. But that's Olympus Coliseum, the second Disney world in our journey through Kingdom Hearts. This was a long one, but well worth it. And if you're interested in joining me on this adventure, then consider subscribing to the channel to show your support. A huge shout out to the amazing patron Sarah Smith, who was the one to free Persephone from the underworld. And if you want your name along with theirs, then consider becoming a patron. So, thank you all so much for watching and supporting, and I'll see you all next time.